what's something that you wish the editor had an option or maybe a game mode or just something that you're like, I feel like I could do a lot if it just had this.
But God, I'd kill for that dead cow asset. It's my favorite asset from all of Co. That's what I want the most.
Hey guys, remember to like, subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and hey, go one step further, become a channel member. Any support you guys give is greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching and enjoy the video. Hello everyone, I am Greyshot17 and today is something quite a bit different. Today I have two content creators with me in a very different way, hoping to talk about what they make, what they do, and kind of give a little insight on themselves, because you have probably have interactions with their creations and you may not have known, where actively for me, you have to check out YouTube and go to Company of Heroes 3 to find my content. Theirs is already in the game in some way. So without further ado, would you two like to introduce, starting with DutchToast?
Yeah, sure. My name is DutchToast. I'm a 45-year-old jaded gamer who really enjoys Company of Heroes. And I've been creating a few maps for the game for just over a year now. And working together with Viceroy on a couple of projects as of late, which you may have seen in the workshop. Don't know if you want to introduce yourself, Viceroy?
Hey guys, this is Foolish Viceroy here. I am about 30 years old. I am one of 3 moderators on the Company of Heroes subreddit, and I had been modding and creating maps for CoH3 for a little bit less time than Dutch for sure. And yeah, together we've made a couple of really fun maps on the workshop.
And it's actually interesting because we do have two perspectives. You have a perspective, someone that's definitely older, probably grew up in a different generation of strategy games and other in that area, and then we have someone closer to my age because I'm 32 that kind of was more in like the 2000s era.
I mean, golden oldies.
Yes, but if I were to ask for you two, what were strategy games that got you into playing games like Company of Heroes, whether it was Company of Heroes or something else? Viceroy, we'll start with you.
I think the first RTS game that I had ever played was Warcraft 3. That was a really big one for me, and that I used to play that with my family a bunch, family and friends. But I think around the time Company of Heroes 1 came out, me and my friends were looking at it and we were like, oh wow, it's like Age of Empires or Warcraft, but in World War II. What a cool idea! And so once we started playing that was the start of Company of Heroes for me. I've been playing ever since.
Yeah, I mean, I go back a little bit further. For me, the first RTS game that I've played was Dune 2, which was kind of, I suppose, in many ways, the predecessor to Command and Conquer. I think I was well into the Dune universe, and I loved the first Dune, which was a completely different type of game. And I remember playing the second one, thinking, "Yeah, this is awesome." So I've been fortunate enough, I suppose, in a way, to have seen the whole evolution of the genre, and I've seen everything basically from Dune to all the Warcrafts. Supreme Commander is one of my favorites as well. And then this game came out for me, which obviously is the original Company of Heroes, and I just got hooked. It was amazing. Much more in your face, much more visceral. The territory capturing was completely new at the time, in a sort of real-time strategy game where it's sort of, your resources were accumulating the more territory you captured. The mechanics, the cover mechanics, I thought it was fantastic. Similar to Dawn of War in many, many respects, which is also an all-time favorite of mine. So I was delighted with the recent sort of re-release, the remaster, if you will. I'm looking forward to Dawn of War 4 as well. I mean, that just looks awesome. So yeah, I've seen a lot of the RTS games, but for me, I think Company of Heroes has always had a bit of a special place in my heart, because I think it brings something unique to the table. There isn't quite anything else out there, really, that scratches that itch.
DutchToast, you said, we were discussing before this, you said you were from the UK. I
live in the UK, but originally I'm from the Netherlands, right? So I've moved to the UK back in, must have been 2003. So I'm getting to a stage now that I've lived longer in the UK than I have in the Netherlands. But yeah, no, originally I'm from the Netherlands, but I've moved to the UK, to Scotland. Yeah. Which is why my accent is all over the place. I
Okay.
blamed some American twangs on watching too many cartoons as a kid because we don't have sort of dubbing. We have subtitles in the Netherlands, so you hear the original voices, and I'm pretty sure I've picked up a sort of an American twang. And then obviously I still have a bit of a Dutch influence, and then obviously some Scottish influence come through. So my accent's all over the place.
Not a problem. Viceroy, where are you from?
I'm from Pennsylvania in the U.S., so it's I don't have quite a interesting moving history as Dutch, but yeah, lived all my life in Pennsylvania.
Well, and again, my accent, I know, like, especially how I speak. First, I'm terrible at speaking certain words, as it's been recorded countless times on my channel. But I now live in Texas, but I grew up in Pennsylvania as well. Near the Pittsburgh area.
Isn't it
So,
right that Pennsylvania has some pretty sort of history that tying back to the Netherlands as well? Weren't there in sort of that area quite a bit of a Dutch commune or Dutch community at the time? Well, way back when, obviously, but
I'm not 100% sure on that.
Well, you have the Pennsylvania Dutch Amish,
well,
Hmm.
there you
but
go. I'll
Yes.
take it.
I think it's a misinterpretation of like Deutsch for German. So I'm not 100% sure, but there were a lot of Dutch settlers in Pennsylvania, I think.
Yeah. My history. My dad was Polish, and his family immigrated to the U.S. in around 1906, 1908, around there. Where now would be northern Ukraine, kind of like that, like those Polish villages. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, he moved in, and then my mom's family's just all over the place. So growing up, always knew Pittsburgh had a lot of German and Polish communities in it, but wasn't 100% sure on Dutch.
There you go. Nice little varied bunch on this interview.
Yeah, but that actually does bring up a lot of interesting perspectives because, again, I know of, let's say, my history when growing up in my community, especially around strategy games and video games. But it is kind of interesting to hear someone from Europe and their take on it because I know what was big when I was growing up, but was strategy games something that was like really big in your community, or was it something you kind of just found and everyone's like, "What are you doing? What is that?"
Absolutely. I think in my friends group, it was predominantly strategy games that we played. I remember, joining LAN parties, and strategy games ruled the roost, whether it was the original Age of Empires or the second one for that matter after a while, or StarCraft and things like that, but also Company of Heroes. We played that to death. So yeah, it was very much, especially my friends group. I mean, I can't speak for the whole nation, but for me and my friends, it was definitely something that was very prominent, very prominent.
What about you, Viceroy?
Yeah, no, 'cause strategy games have always been a big part of what I've played. I'm one of those people who only plays like one or two games at a time. I have a hard time getting off of a certain game and then doing like a large variety of ones. So yeah, Co and Battlefield, that's a new game. Sort of things that are sort of my bread and butter. I can't do without them.
Okay. And again, like, it was a complete fluke that I got more into strategy games because I loved Halo. So like shooters on console, and Halo Wars came out, and at the time, my only experience was World in Conflict, and when I liked it, my PC constantly broke because it was the family PC that I had to share at the time. So I was like, okay, if I'm gonna play strategy games, I guess I have to go to console. And luckily, there was that breadth of strategy games in the late 2000s that helped. And then when my friends immigrated to PC for like Civilization 5, one of them recommended CoH3, and that's the only reason why I started playing that was off a friend recommendation.
Yeah, Co2 especially. I didn't think I'd ever get into Co2, but I think the only reason I got into it was the US faction was $4 on Steam at one point. And that was my introduction to Co2. That's all I owned was the US faction for $4. And I think I got 1,000 hours on that alone.
I remember when it came out, I wasn't even that big a fan of Company of Heroes 2 when it was released. I played it, and at the time, I've never been a competitive multiplayer gamer, to be quite honest. I've always quite enjoyed sort of comp stomping and mostly PvE with my friends. But I remember that we sort of I played the single player campaign, and I was like, coming from Company of Heroes 1, it just felt, I don't know, off. So I parked it for quite a long time. And I think it must have been around the time that the Western armies became available that I gave it another shot, and I was just completely hooked. But yeah, I remember distinctly during the sort of launch, I wasn't overly impressed with it. Which is weird when you think about how many hours I've, just like Viceroy, I've later sunk into it. Yeah, it's quite remarkable how much of a comeback it had made for me. So yeah, there you go.
But I mean, there is a little bit of truth to a game can find its footing over time.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
so in the case for Company of Heroes 2, I think a lot of the expansions, single player, multiplayer, as well as numerous free weekends really did help bring in that
Yep.
audience that wasn't there at launch. And then finding a game that was in a way better state, had more features, I think really helped cement that game and then drew up support for CoH3. Uh, and then CoH3 launched and we'll go from there. But so you both have had interactions with strategy games in the past. What propelled you to start making? It doesn't necessarily have to be map making content in CoH3, but when did you start getting the inkling, like, hey, maybe I could start making adjustments or making maps or kind of editing the game in some way?
I don't know if you want
But
to go first.
oh no, I'll let you go first for sure. You start with your Red Bull remake after making a couple
I mean,
maps, right?
yeah, but I mean, modding in general goes back for me quite a bit further. It goes back to the days of Quake 2, where I used to be part of an ensemble that created a mod for Quake 2 called Terror Quake 2, which kind of was, and I don't know if you remember those days at all, or if you had any sort of involvement in the scene at the time. I can't even remember how long ago it is, to be quite honest. It feels like an ancient history now, but there was a mod out there at the time called Action Quake 2, and I remember that these guys were getting the weapon models from Gooseman, the original Counter-Strike creator, and they ran with it, and a bunch of guys and I sort of got together and thought we could do something similar, but then a bit more realistic. So rather than quite an arcadey action movie style, we have a bit more sort of a more realistic SWAT type, law enforcement versus terrorist kind of setup. And I got quite far with it, but eventually it all kind of fell apart and went our separate ways kind of thing. But that's the roots of where I started modding, but that's, obviously unrelated to strategy gaming. But I think the next game that I did some modding with, and in specific creating maps, was for Battlefield Vietnam. When that came out, I thought that was an amazing game in a setting that I really enjoyed. So I created some, particularly again at the time with a focus on sort of single player, PvE kind of maps. And then the whole thing went dormant for a while. And it wasn't until Company of Heroes 3 came around and I realized, Red Bull isn't part of this. I was like, that needs to be fixed. And I started looking and joining various discords, and nobody had plans to create it. And I thought, you know what, screw it, I'm going to do it myself. Having no experience in Company of Heroes modding, mapping, or the Essence editor, I started from scratch. And I think the first tutorial really that I back to back sort of watched and sort of created along was the 101 mapping tutorial. 101, I should say, mapping tutorial that Bacon and John from Relic had sort of put up on YouTube. And I thought, yeah, I'm just going to watch this and I'm going to play along in the editor as they're doing stuff to get a feel for how it works. And it sort of snowballed from there. My ultimate goal at the end of the day when I started this was I wanted to create a Red Bull Express for Company of Heroes 3, plain and simple. I was a massive fan of the original, and I just wanted to play that in this game. And I was like, this is such a great map. Why haven't they ported it? Why is this part of the standard package? And I thought, okay, so if nobody else will, then I'll learn myself to do it. And I started creating a few maps. I started with a 4v4 called Quaglietta, and then I did another one, and then another one. Cerrone Approach was the last one before I sort of tackled Red Bull. But these, in essence, were just me getting familiar with the tools and understanding how a map is built. Effectively, the maps before Red Bull were all just me playing around. So yeah, that's kind of my history, and it kind of grew into a bit of a hobby. I really enjoy doing it. The way I kind of look at it is, how I love city building games as well, and I see people create the most detailed, fantastic cities in games like City Skylines, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. But ultimately, it's just them that can see it, right? So if you create a highly detailed city in City Skylines, yeah, I mean, you can show your family and all the rest of it and your friends, but you can't share it. You can't play it together. And this, for me, is the antidote to that, because I can create a really highly detailed landscape, village, town, whatever you want to call it. But then with the added benefit of I can share it with other people so they can play it, and I can blow it all up in the game. So that for me was like the icing on the cake that sort of triggered that sort of, oh, this is really I like this. This is great. And then, obviously on the back of some of the releases that I've had, a lot of people were quite sort of encouraging and complimentary. So I was like, maybe I'm onto something here. And I'm not an artist. I've got the artistic skills of a doorknob. I don't class myself an artist. But for some reason, it seemed to work and people liked it. So that kind of spurred you on. And, before you know it, how many maps are we now, Viceroy? I mean, quite a few. But yeah, that's how it kind of started for me.
Viceroy, what about you?
I really have never been much of a modder. I had taken a look inside the files after I'd played Warcraft 3, and I had built like little towns and villages because I thought that aspect was really cool and like the single player campaigns. But I once I put that down, I never touched modding tools ever again. But I think it started one day on the CoH3 Discord. Dutch had shared screenshots of his remake of Red Ball Express, and those were extremely beautiful screenshots. It looked really good. So once I saw that, I was like, wow, this is incredible. I love CoH2. I have 3,000-4,000 hours in CoH2. It'd be great to see that map again. So I had gone in touch with Dutch. I'd gone into the map and had gone over every square inch of that map, and I was like, man, this is really nice. But also there could be like, this area could maybe be improved, or we could add this area, swap around the resource points. Yeah, it was a beautiful map. Like if I didn't message Dutch, it would have been a fine map entirely altogether. But it had sparked my curiosity into the world of map making in Co. So, after that, it was the Olivito Citra, that for the map making competition. That was another one where I started to, I had dipped my toes only a little bit with messaging you on Red Bulb, and then messaging you way more for Olivito or Oliveto.
Yeah.
And that was a lot more involved, where, we had talked about adding different things to the map that were major landmarks, like the bunkers or the church. There's it went through a major transformational change on that map. But at the end of the day, that was all me chatting with Dutch and going through the map and not actually doing any of the editor work. So once that came out and people really enjoyed that, then I was like, well, I should probably start putting my money where my mouth is and actually start, actually making changes by hand to these maps and working on it from scratch with Dutch. So I think our biggest first map together was Port of Bizerte, which is a North African remake of Port of Hamburg. And we spent 3 months on that map. We went over every square inch of it. And people seem to really like that on the workshop. We got a lot of downloads. People play it a bunch. Comp Stompers love those kind of maps. But after that, we started just pumping out a whole bunch of remakes. We remade General Mud, and we recently remade 3 Company of Hero 1 maps, as a sort of an experiment, since, CoH3 has a very similar resource system to CoH1. So we thought it'd be really interesting to remake those original maps, but with, the CoH3's enhanced graphics and et cetera, et cetera. So we remade Eagle at Dawn, Flooded Plains, and Duclair. And all of them are available to play right now in the Steam Workshop.
General Mud.
Yes,
So-
General Mud 2 especially.
And just for clarification, because you say for the you brought up a couple maps. First, I'll start off with the Red Ball Express. A map that you guys were like, well, we should probably add that to the game. That is, I mean, like into the workshop. Relic reached out and said we want to add it into the proper game.
Yep.
So what would
That's exactly what happened.
what is that conversation like for someone who was like, hey, I don't make maps. I'll make this because I like the map from CoH2. I want to put in CoH3. To then having it being like, oh, by the way, you're going to be in the game proper next to all the official maps.
I mean, for me, that was, it was an almost indescribable feeling to be, and I kind of, because John from Relic at some point asked for a few words, and by means of introduction. And I think when the deep dive was sort of aired on YouTube on that particular update from which Red Ball was a part of, it was John that sort of introduced it with my words. And at the end of the day, I just feel proud and honored to be part of the legacy of Company of Heroes. It's a gaming franchise that I've played since day dot. And then to see your work featured in it. And what I find more pleasing is people playing it and seeing what they're doing on it, how they're playing it, and the stunts they pull off. And I think that was just an amazing feeling. I mean, for me, it wasn't so much about credit seeking or justification. For me, it was just like, I really enjoy making these maps, and the cherry of the icing on the icing on the cake, or the cherry on top, whatever you want to call it, for me was just that it was deemed worthy enough to be included in the base game. That for me was like a massive boon, a massive uplift in my confidence. And I think it just snowballed from there. But coming back to what Viceroy said, it was a really interesting sort of history. It was very fortuitous, if not serendipitous, that he sort of reached out with regards to Red Ball. And I can't emphasize enough how much his feedback and cooperation at the start of it all sort of helped shape my ideas. Because bearing in mind, I am not a competitive player, not in the least. I'm not into that scene. I hate losing. So if I play up against really good players, I want to have a good time. I just want to shoot some stuff up and blow some stuff up and all the rest of it. And hopefully at the end of the day, come away with a win. But Viceroy is much more ingrained in the competitive scene. So to get pointers from him around, can we change this? Or, the cover isn't quite where it needs to be because it's imbalanced because of X, Y, Z. Or, can we change the territory layout here because, it's not quite balanced, or, this would be a great cutoff. That sort of insight to me was like gold dust, because it's the sort of stuff that I've never really thought about or considered, or, generally not be fussed about, simply because, I'm more of a PvE kind of gamer. And he sort of took that and said, well, actually, could we do it this way, that way, this way? And I relied very heavily on that sort of feedback from him for Oliveto's Citra, the one that got very far in the mapping competition. And I don't think it would have gotten to the stage where it is now without his insights and his very valuable feedback. And I think, certainly over the last couple of maps that we've created that are more 1v1 as an example, where balance is incredibly important, the early engagements and all the rest of it, how that sort of flows. He's been instrumental in getting that right. And we've obviously got a fairly large group of people involved to test the map, give feedback, and you make many iterations. But he's been absolutely instrumental, certainly in my own personal development as a mapper, creating these kind of things, giving me insights into things that I never would have considered or just even thought about. And it's made the maps much better at the end of the day. And I think that's a win for everyone. I should also say, without a shadow of a doubt, for me personally, I don't think I would have been capable of even contemplating to create something like Red Ball without the amazing community in the co-world builders Discord. I relied very heavily on the feedback from a lot of these folks, and they're an amazing community. They're very cooperative and very friendly. You can ask loads of questions, and beyond the sort of tutorial and that I watched on YouTube by Relic, I relied very heavily around, how do you do this and how do you do that and what's good here and what tool do you use, so there's a lot of assistance that goes on behind the scenes, but I just wanted to give them a shout out as well because they're all amazing.
Viceroy, maybe because I feel like you might say something similar. So I guess maybe talking about the Discord and other things. Some of the maps that you both created, like Olivetos Citra, again, got pretty far. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it number 2 in the map maker competition? Which is incredible because again, it's not just your map got into the game. It's a bunch of people that are very, very analytical about the game and how it's supposed to run, saying, by the way, out of all these contestants, you're the second best. And that's for a 4v4 map.
Yeah, I mean, I was really pleased, genuinely pleased on a number of levels. I had 2 maps in the running. The other one was Cerrone Approach, which got 5th place, which I was kind of chuffed about because, again, this was one of my sort of just try out things kind of map, right? But it was advanced enough that I thought, okay, maybe if I just submit that, because that was the first one I submitted into the competition. We'll see how far it gets. And even during the competition, you get lots of feedback, so you make changes. And ultimately, I made a tournament edition of Cerrone Approach, which was a much more slimmed down, much more focused sort of version, because the original was quite wide and lots of walk time, travel time, and all the rest of it. But then to see a map which was literally started as a sort of sketch on my phone, where I thought, okay, I'm going to do something else beyond Cerrone. I'm going to submit a second map into the competition. And this is going to be, a purebred competitive map. Yeah, the original was still more PvE oriented almost. That's how it kind of started out. Obviously changes were made, but the second one, Oliveto, needs to be purebred competitive play. It needs to be balanced to a T. You don't want to have the discussion that, one side is favorable over another because, there's a building there where on the other side there isn't. So it needed to be absolutely spot on. And that's, again, where Viceroy was absolutely fantastic in his feedback. But then to get that accolade and to get the recognition for it was just, I was over the moon.
So for all of your maps, because I remember when Relic initially talked about CoH3 and they said they didn't want to introduce community maps because of potential negative feedback to the map makers. Have either of you two had negative experiences with people like calling you out or negatively responding to one of your maps?
No,
absolutely not. Yeah, most of the maps have gotten
favorable feedback.
Yeah. We, if anything, we getting a lot of thumbs up on the workshop. We love those thumbs up because I think there's a certain threshold until you get stars on the Steam Workshop, like a star rating, which is really interesting. Like you need like at least 30 to 35 people rating your map for a rating to appear, which is an interesting system. But I mean, a lot of people seem to really enjoy the maps. But it's been an interesting journey for sure. We've most of our maps have been remakes after Oliveto. I could point to very specific things on Oliveto or Red Ball that were specifically my ideas, but anytime the maps that we've made look really good, that is all Dutch. He's got an incredible green thumb, and I think that's been something that really draws people in when they look at these maps. They say, okay, well, this map looks really good, and it plays pretty good too. So. It's they seem to be popular, especially these days when there's not a wealth of custom maps in CoH3, but people like to play something new.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think for me, one of the criteria for a map, it needs to look pretty. At the end of the day, it can flow fine, it can play fine, it can have all the hallmarks of a classic Company of Heroes map. But if it looks bad, for me, that's a massive turnoff. So innately, I have a desire to go perhaps overboard on the detailing, not just the texture work, but also the sort of general object placement and object density, which I think is something that I've learned over time, that sometimes less is more. You don't need to fill every square inch of a map with objects, because if anything, it's to the detriment of pathing. Your units at the end of the day still need to navigate in between all of the stuff that you put on a map. So if you clutter it up too much, then it's just a problem. But for me, that was an initial sort of almost like a natural thing to do, to just put loads and loads of objects in. But as time goes on and you learn more about how the game ticks, kind of thing, you start to take it a little bit back and you think a bit more about object density and placement and cover and balance. But yeah, for me, I think one of the main things is it needs to look good as well. It's not just play good, because at the end of the day, you're still looking at a screen. And what you're seeing, there needs to be some eye candy. If it looks awful, then you're going to get turned off by it. At least I am. I would imagine most other people will have a similar sort of view on it. So, yeah, I like to pretty it up.
Yeah, circling back to your original question, Greyshot, most of our maps are remakes. So it's very lucky that, when people look at something like Red Ball and they play it and they have their issues with it in terms of gameplay, they don't shoot or yell at the person who recreated the map. By remaking a lot of these maps, mostly 1-to-1, we inherit a lot of the same pros and cons of the original designs that we have tried not to change too much from the original maps. So we're lucky that people don't, yell at us, because they have, most people rightfully understand that, these maps are remakes. They're not completely original in terms of like some malicious design or anything. So so far it's been a pretty good experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like for Red Bull as an example, people have this perhaps rose-colored tinted vision of Red Bull in the back of their head when they're playing this, and they perhaps distinctly remember that it was bigger when they were playing it in Company of Heroes 2. And so one of the sort of things that I often read is, I wish the map was bigger or wider. And it's like, well, this is at the end of the day a one-on-one literal recreation using the exact original sizes, dimensions, height map even of the original, right? So it's like whole purpose is to recreate the original map, not necessarily expanded. Or you could, I mean, at the end of the day, I could have made Red Bull a lot wider than what it currently is, and that could very well be interesting, but that was not necessarily the goal that I set out to achieve at the time. For me, it was just, I really want to play the original Red Bull in Company of Heroes 3 and see how that works. And it's interesting with the new dynamics of the factions in Company of Heroes 3, it does play differently. Not necessarily better or worse, it just plays differently. But perhaps that's something that people sort of, I wish it was a bit bigger, and because there's towing now, and units tend to traverse a bit faster due to the heavy focus on light vehicles, and they may have a point, but that was never the original sort of intent or design to tweak too much around the sizing. I think more to Viceroy's point, we try to really recreate one-on-one, but we do tend to take a view on cover balance. Does it make sense? And I certainly think, with certain maps of Viceroy, you can probably talk to this a bit better than I can, but we absolutely took feedback of Company of Heroes 2 maps at the time and thought, okay, so this seems to be the prevailing issue with the map. How can we solve that without completely restructuring the original spirit of the map, kind of thing? And that's I think that's
we could talk all day about the process too. It's a lot to talk about, but well, I'll let you go through your list of questions for sure. I'm sure you've got a nice. He's got a nice bullet point list of questions. We're powering through every single one of them unprompted.
I'm gonna be very honest. You have skipped over like 3 or 4 in a single answer, and I'm like, all right, next one. And honestly, it's funny because the entire answer you guys gave in the last like 2 minutes is what I think like a great distillation of what game developers have to think of. Like, for example, Silent Hill 2, there was a remake that came out. The Metal Gear Solid 3 remake came out. It's like, okay, we have to have it exactly how people remember it, but we can't change it up too much and fix the problems and issues we want to potentially fix. So there's like a balancing
Really
act.
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really difficult
Yeah.
because, like I said, people have this sort of rose-tinted view of what they enjoyed in the past. Yeah, and for some of them, I can't remember how long ago Red Bull and Company of Heroes 2 came out, but I'm sure the good folk that created Red Bull for Company of Heroes 2 had a similar issue when they took the original from Company of Heroes 1, redesigned it much more than we have for the version in Company of Heroes 3. And, they would have struggled with that as well. And ultimately, you want to make it recognizable. So you don't want to mess around with it too much, but equally you can't ignore that the dynamics in the game are different to an extent. Certain items that or entities that you're finding in Company of Heroes 2 have different cover sort of versus Company of Heroes 3. So you have to
Yeah.
take sort of stuff into consideration. So yeah, it is a fine balance because you want to keep the original spirit alive, but you have to face the reality that it's not the same game. The mechanics are slightly different, the entities that you're working with are different. And that for me was a big challenge. How do you translate, a classic map like Red Bull, which is quite sunny and quite verdant and into an Italian landscape. It's completely different vegetation. So how do you take that and sort of translate that in? And it's the same, I think, to an extent with Port of Hamburg, the remake that we did. We're taking a damp, dank, rainy Company of Heroes 2 map set somewhere in northern Germany, and we're taking that to the north coast of Africa. I mean, we don't really. Where do you
It,
start? That
if you,
was the whole process.
Yeah, it's been a crazy, creative process. I don't know if you have a
Mhm.
question on your list, Greyshot, that says,
Oh,
how do you guys creatively adapt these maps and remakes? But if you do, you could probably ADR that question in. But people seem to forget that a lot of Co-1 maps underwent the same process. For
Yeah.
Co-2, a lot of Co-1 maps were adapted for the Eastern Front, like Langrskaya or even Red Ball, because Red Ball is a very industrial sort of French countryside look in Co-1, and in Co-2, you have the Russian buildings everywhere, and the thematic location of where the map takes place didn't change for certain maps, like Red Ball, but for like Langris, for example, that one was Langrskaya. That's somewhere in the Russian countryside. It's not in France anymore. So that's sort of the idea we had when we were looking at some of these maps, like Port of Bizerte. That's one of the two deep water ports in North Africa. So we wanted to make sure that we could stay true to the idea of what the map looked like in Code 2 while completely adapting the look and feel of the environment around it. Same goes for General Mud. General Mud is a very contentious Code 2 map, but it's also a very large Code 2 map. So putting that into Code 3, we can say, there's a lot of mud around Monte Cassino around the time of the invasion of that area. So we can change the flavor text, but obviously we don't have Code 2 or Code 1 buildings in the editor. We can sort of change the scenario of the maps a bit when we look at them.
I mean, and that's fair. That's something you all have to think about because Co2 there's also mechanics in Co2 and Co1 that maybe are not in Co3. I think of Co2 as having the blizzard system and the freezing water and the ice and that sort of stuff. So let's say, and I'm pulling it out because I used to love this map and it's terrible. It's was it Face Off at Rostov? The infamous one
Yeah.
with the two bridges across that one side could destroy. I actually like fighting on the side of the bridges, like starting on that vantage point. Um, but that map you really couldn't remake in Co3 because the central core of some of the core features of that map are features not in Co3. So you have to fundamentally change the layout and design of it if you were to,
I
let's
hear a
say, put in
challenge
Co3.
there.
Yeah. Hey, maybe you look, no matter what you both do, you would obviously make it better than what it was in CoH3.
Well, don't know about that, but yeah, it's really interesting, and for me, it's part of the fun, right? So when you think about Port of Bizerte and Duclair, for an example, and for me in particular, Flooded Plains, which was an absolute classic map back in the day. How do you take that and turn it into something that is original? What's the theme that you're going with, and how does that fit in either North Africa or Italy for that matter? And Flooded Plains, I think we both wanted to turn that into a more sort of North African setting, and I was really keen on exploring, well, Africa is more than just deserts. What if we try to make that into a really verdant, lush landscape that is almost approaching a jungle?
Yeah,
And
Flooded
yeah,
Plains and General Mud have a lot more in common than people would think. Those two maps are very contentious in their respective games because I think in Co-1, water was sort of like a red cover territory as you crossed over it. So the map was very balanced around the placement of large bodies of traversable water, while General Mud was balanced through, and this is obviously, it was changed later on, but General Mud was very balanced around the presence of deep mud, slowing you down, the red cover around there. So in Co3, we have neither of those mechanics, for better or worse.
mm,
And so I think that when we remake these maps, they benefit greatly from the lack of certain things that we had in earlier codes, which is something rare to say, but it did end up helping the gameplay and flow of a lot of Co3 maps in general.
Is there any maps that from either Co1, Co2, or maybe your own original idea that you've been thinking of or been wanting to do, but now you're like, now that you're through kind of a lot of remakes, you're like, I think this is time we could do X map. And if it's another remake, that's absolutely fine. I'm just kind of curious to see what you guys want to do next.
well, we're kind of working on a current project that Viceroy was very keen on, so I'll let you talk that through, Viceroy.
Yeah, it's interesting. You sometimes you have an idea in your head, and the more time you spend tossing that idea around, the more you start to doubt it about whether or not it would work. But right now we are currently working on a North African remake of Lien Forest from Co2, which is one of my favorite Co2 maps, period. I think that's a
You piqued my
fantastically
interest.
fun map.
Continue.
Yeah, so people will say, okay, well, why is there a forest in North Africa? I thought it was all desert. What the heck is a North African forest even going to look like? And to answer that, there are forests in North Africa, believe it or not. And one forest that we picked was Cedarteal Forest. In 1943, the Allies were trying to push from inland Tunisia towards the coast, ironically circling back to the port of Bizerte. So there was a lot of railway towns out in the middle of North Africa, and they would be surrounded by these large patches of forest. And there were two battles at Cedarteal, and during those battles, British and German paratroopers met in combat for the first time in World War II. And that's actually during those engagements that the Germans started giving the British airborne the nickname Red Devils. So we looked at that and we said, wow, what a creative way to justify a forest in North Africa. So we can have, this railway town with a forest nearby. And, although it's completely different in terms of setting from Lien Forest, which of course I think is a fictional name for that region, we wanted to take that concept and then turn it into a Co3 historically context accurate battle. And yeah, we're well underway. It's looking really good. We have another map that we already plan on working on after that. But I think after that, once we're done these two remakes, it would be nice to circle back around and maybe create something original. But that's all in the future. It takes quite a while to remake some of these maps, depending on the size of them. So for 1v1 maps, it would take our fastest was like a month. We remade Duclair, which is a 2v2. We finished that within 3 weeks, and we're still sort of polishing it off a little bit right now. But with two people working in two different time zones, we're able to use sort of like a shared Google Drive and sync up our progress between two people. So we get done these maps surprisingly very quickly compared to a single map maker.
Yeah,
That's
that's the secret sauce, I think, in the speed at which we're able to get through some of this stuff. Yeah, it's I don't think people really recognize or realize just how much effort and time, not so much the effort, because the editor is pretty easy once you get to understand it, but just how much time goes into the detailing and the layering, the texture work, the object placement, humming and hawing
It's not
about.
as easy as people think, for sure. People are always
No.
like, well, people are like, why don't they just import Leon Forest or Red Ball into Co3? Just click the import button. It's so easy, bro.
obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, not quite.
No, not quite. We're placing every single object manually by hand and then changing sizes, looking at impasse, and there's just so much involved. And the quiet thing no one ever knows is that to make a map look good, you have to do an intense amount of splines and splats, which for the layman is basically putting these transparent stickers on the ground. And that's what makes maps look really good. And the atmospheres, there's a lot of different factors, but it's never quite as easy as clicking an import button. They have to be remade from scratch to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, just to sort of give you an indication of the size, I know, Greyshot, you played Oliveto on one of your streams, and I appreciate that, by the way. But just from a sheer scale perspective, there's 11,178 individual entities on that map, and that could be the smallest of barrels to the biggest of houses. Each one of those is an entity, but there's over 11,000 entities on that map alone. When you're thinking about splat and sort of spline work, there's over 30,000 individual splats, which is like a small grounding texture, if you will, that you could put underneath a sort of an object, or to further define a particular area, like splotches of grass, that sort of stuff. There's over 30,000 in that map alone, all placed by hand, sized by hand, rotated by hand, strip components like roads and that sort of stuff, those kind of textures. There's over 2,000 in that map alone, and there's 316 walls in there, all shaped by hand, moved about by hand, lengthened, shortened, play tested by hand. So all in all, there's close to 50,000 objects on a single map. Just let that sink in. It's all placed by hand. There's no automated process here, not to the extent that you would expect by just clicking an import button. It doesn't work that way.
I understand people getting simplistic views of mods in terms of how certain things are done based on other games, right? Like, I can't think of it offhand, but I know like when I grew up, there was like the Forge maps in Halo, and it'd be like, oh, just download it and you can edit all. It's like that sort of stuff. It's like, oh, that's real easy. But now you look at like a Forge map and it's so complicated. I'm like, I can't. I don't even know where to start. But no, the fact that you both spend so much time individually handcrafting every little piece in these maps, and I know you guys have the original to base it off of, but you're still giving your own charm and making it make sense. Yeah. That's a lot of skill and a lot of talent, and really helps highlight your guys' maps a lot more than other, because there are a lot of maps in Co3's community workshop that you can download, but it takes a certain amount of talent and effort to really make it shine through and be like, oh, we should definitely check out those maps for our community night, or to play with friends or randoms.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah,
Thanks, man. We do.
Yeah,
I
appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think you guys deserve a lot of people behind the scenes deserve a lot of credit, because when people play it, they'll just be like, yeah, that was fine, and their fine is there was no issues, there was no bugs, there was no problems, or something like that, because there are maps in the past where if you play, people avoid it because you could crash it could start lagging. It could do all sorts of negative effects to your PC. In CoH2, there was a map, Sittard Summer, that would essentially, the longer you played, the worse the frame rate got, to where it was like single digits after an hour. It was really bad. But because it's a bridge map, most games would last that long. So eventually, people are like, "Can we please remove this, please?"
There's a great remake of that on the workshop, by the way. One of my compatriots from the CoH Discord, the CoH World Builder Discord, Matt Munchkin, he's recreated it in CoH3, and it's an excellent map. So I highly recommend checking it out. Yeah.
Sittard
No,
I believe it's called.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess to kind of continue on with maybe the Discord, which, by the way, I will try to have links to DutchToast and Viceroy's maps in the description. I will also try to include the Discord down below. But maybe you two can kind of interject the Discord, you guys entering the Discord, and the help you guys have gotten on that Discord.
Well, I mean, I can't overemphasize just how important it was for me at the time, being, again, completely new to this, zero experience, nothing. I mean, I've not touched the editor. Like I said, I'm not an artist by trade, so I'm about as artistic as a doornail. But just to be able to understand from everyone how the editor functions, and like I said, the one-on-one tutorial does a good job in sort of talking you through the basics, but then you get to the slightly more advanced stuff. And if you're stuck with something, you want to do something, how does that work? And it's not covered in the tutorial. Then for me, that was a fantastic resource to be able to go into and just ask questions, because there's a lot of Company of Heroes royalty, I would say, including the man Bacon himself, who is on that Discord. So you can ask away, and there's a lot of regulars who will go out of their way really to help you understand what buttons you need to click and why and where, and the sort of core functionality beyond what's covered in the sort of tutorial. For me, it was absolutely invaluable, and I can't stress that enough. Not to mention the fact that they're incredibly generous with their time and their knowledge and just their eagerness to sort of help. Yeah, GB Pirate is an example, the organizer for the map making competition. He helped me tremendously, and it's the same with Espus, and it's the same with Talha, and there's a whole bunch. Shadow Freak as well, and let's not forget him. Tim Evans. There's a couple of regulars on that forum. Shieldkute as well. I mean, I can list them all off, but there's Brian. There's a huge number of people that are active on that Discord and will go out of their way to help you. And that, for me, it was just amazing. Just this sort of initial feedback, the encouragement, and we're all happy to share stuff that we're working on, putting screenshots up on map channels, and this is where we are currently, and this is kind of what it looks like. And you get a couple of likes and some comments and some feedback, and we test each other's maps out and that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's been great. It's a great community, really is.
Yeah. Jumping in on that right there. For people who are not familiar with the World Builders Discord, it's a Discord where all of us map makers, are on one Discord server, and all the channels are names of maps. So you can keep a good track of maps that are in progress or have been made, and you can leave feedback and share progress on all of these different channels. So, for example, all of our maps, they have channels on that Discord. We've shared progress. We've gotten people to play test these maps. And that's what the Discord is good for, because, none of us, aside from, the lead mappers at Relic, we're all players. We're all trying to figure out how to use this editor that's, a new version of the CoH3 Essence editor, and trying to figure out, how can we make these maps look good? How can we make them balanced? And how can we make sure that they all play well? And it's a very collaborative effort, even for people who don't make maps, feedback, play testing. These are all really invaluable things that Discord is good for.
And it sounds like you guys are very welcoming. I mean, just based on you two and your experience, sounds like that Discord is very welcoming to any person who wants to start map making.
For sure. Yeah, and I would encourage you. Yeah, 100%.
And the greatest thing you can do, even if you're not a map maker, is always leave feedback. As a comment on Steam or through Discord. Feedback is what really helps map makers improve their maps. You could put in 100 different things, but if it doesn't feel balanced or if it doesn't play right, that's something that you would never know until a human plays a map and they tell you like, hey, this is I like this idea, but it could be changed or adjusted a little bit. That's always a great thing. That's always gold dust. So on that vein, we do appreciate you playing some of these maps on stream. The feedback on those have been really helpful.
Yeah,
100%.
I know I've kind of diverged to some other games like Broken Arrow and Battlefield, but I still want to do co-nights, and if I can get enough people, I'll gladly play more custom games on custom maps, because that's usually, again, a good way for you guys to see like, okay, how is it? And it also, I kind of like playing a lot of them as well, because like, oh, this is a new experience. This, like, your general mud map was just a really cool design. I'm like, wow, this looks really good and it plays really well. I'm sorry my teammate fell apart, but hey, I was having a good time.
Yeah, but I think we General Mud was one of my maps that I was really keen on. I think there's a bit of a standing joke in the World Builder Discord that I'm kind of the mud man. I like really muddy maps because I think the texture that brings to the ground and the way that units interact and the tracks that you're leaving, it feels really thick and meaty. And so I was really keen on doing that. And I tried to go to the nth degree to get that really muddy feeling into that map using techniques I'd never used on any other map and try and bring something new to that. The atmosphere. Shame that you were rotating your camera on the screen, by the way. Great shot, because, and this is another sort of pet peeve of mine, but let's not go into it too deep. At the end of the day, you design a map using the default camera because that's how you the flow, but you also tailor the lighting, the atmospherics to that default camera view, and it never looks quite as good when you rotate the camera. So as an example, on General Mud, you really only get the sense of that really gritty, muddy feeling in the default camera because of the angle of the sun and the way that the light reflects off the textures. If you rotate the camera with the sun behind you, you don't see that glint, that light reflection. The shadows aren't quite as pronounced. So yeah, it's not quite, but you should try it again from the sort of team 1 position rather than team 2 and see how it feels, because I can guarantee you it'll look a lot different. But yeah, so you try and bring something new to the table with every map, and hopefully something that hasn't really been done before. And it was interesting, around the same time that we were working on that, ultimately there was a new update coming out with a revised Mignano Gap from Monolithic Bacon himself, which took the same kind of really muddy, bombed out sort of feeling. But he obviously has a completely different approach. He's he, and he does what he does best. But I think for me, there was a distinct lack of that really muddy, dank, dystopian feel almost, to an extent. War wasn't pretty, and I think a lot of the maps that we've seen befit the biome and the area that they're obviously set in, and in the timescales that they played out. But if you look in the Italian campaign, especially the winters were horrific, like proper horrific. Snow, biting cold, rains, flooding, mud drenched. And I'd never really seen a map in Company of Heroes 3 that kind of reflected that. I think the closest we got was Rapido River. But even then, that wasn't quite as muddy enough for me. So I really tried to go overboard on the mud aspects.
Do you remember my reaction when you told me that you wanted to do General Mud?
Yeah, you were not a fan. I can remember that.
My initial my knee jerk reaction was like, why would you ever bring this map back to go? I think a lot of people will have the same reaction. They're like, why, this map was not good in Code 2? Why are we bringing it back? But it's just surprising. Like as Dutch said, like there's mud scenarios happen all the time in war. And the Italy campaign was no exception. So, when we're looking at it, like the big reason why people didn't like General Mud was because of the mud, the what would you call it? The thing that affected infantry movement, the deep mud, that was not really a factor in CoH3. So, it plays much differently in terms of like what's balanced and all the different things that make CoH3 unique. But yeah, eventually I came around to it, and I think it was a good call overall on Dutch's behalf to try to remake that map.
But I remember very distinctly during some of the discussions around map design that people preferred the sort of wider flanking routes, the mobility that it brings, because obviously there's a lot of light vehicle play, and people enjoy that sort of wide angled approach. And as you could probably recall, General Mud, the bases are in the corners rather than in the center of a side of the map, so you've got that wide angle flank almost on both sides. And I thought, you know what, I think General Mud is probably a really good fit because it fits that profile. You've got a bit of dense clustering of buildings in the center, you've got the wide open fields and roads sort of on the flanks, and I thought, this could be a really good map for diverse play where you've got people flanking on the side and trying to entrench the town center kind of thing. And I thought, yeah, and I'm really chuffed with how it turned out. Yeah, so I think it was successful in that regard. But yeah, absolutely. I think I took a sort of double take almost when Viceroy's initial reaction was, "Oh God, no." Okay, perhaps you could elaborate, because I was like, because I wasn't a competitive player, that wasn't known to me. The way I recall it was a pretty muddy map, and it was nice in PvE and all the rest of it, but I never played it competitively. So to hear that feedback, I was like, okay, I see. I get where this is going and where it's coming from. That's fine, but I still like to make it, and we did, So and which is why I'm also delighted to work with him on Leanne Forest, which is another very good map that I'm just overjoyed to be able to bring to Company of Heroes 3 at some point. Together with Viceroy, I think we're doing a pretty decent job so far. I'd say it's shaping up quite nicely.
Yeah, it's interesting trying to divide the work between two people on making these maps. For Olivito, a lot of the bulk of the the beauty of the map, that's all Dutch. And because I wasn't really much into map making at the time, it was just my ideas for certain areas in terms of balance. That's a fully original map. So you have to be more careful with how things are balanced, how things play and flow. But with these remakes, it's nice to, sort of kick back and fall into the original design intent of these maps and really try to flex creatively different ways it could look. But yeah, it's been a fun process.
If I may, because just so people understand, like, oh, they've made a couple maps. Okay, they've made, and hopefully I get this right, Duclair, Flooded Plains, Eggleton's, General Mud, Porta Bizerta, Serrani Approach. You also made White Ball Express,
Yep.
Which is great. I'm still waiting on Blue Ball Express, by the way. So,
Red and White Ball are all Dutch. I can't take any credit whatsoever for how well they look. White Ball he just did on his own. I woke up one morning and it was like, I've done a White Ball.
Not so fast, right? So Red Ball, in its current iteration as part of the game, that territory layout is 100% your design.
Yeah.
So the version that's currently on the workshop, which is, in my personal workshop kind of thing, that still has the classic Company of Heroes 2 layout and territory sort of resources and that sort of stuff. But the one that's currently in the game itself, I can't take credit for that particular layout. And it was slightly changed. We added some territories, particularly in the corners, again, based on your view of how we could improve on the original Red Ball. So, to say that you didn't, that was all me, that's not strictly true. I think you had a pretty heavy hand in, for all the right reasons, in the design of the territory layout and where resources should be positioned to get that classic Red Ball Express sort of feeling. But yeah, White Ball is that was one of my, in fact, it was the one that I created after Red Ball because there was a bit of a clamor for it. And I spoke to
really fun map too. Very fun.
Yeah,
map
I was really pleased how it turned out. I spoke to the original author to seek permission because, it's the right thing to do. Look, I want to do this. And he was like, yeah, this is great. I think he, by then, already knew of some of my work. And he was like, yeah, go for it, man. And we had some conversations about the original design philosophy of White Ball in Company of Heroes 2, but then also looking at some of the things that he would change if he were to still make changes to it now. If you had the opportunity, what would you do differently? So I was fortunate enough to be able to have that sort of conversation with him and implement that in the workshop version for Company of Heroes 3, which I was chuffed about.
Yeah, we have two different workshops. If you go on Steam and you look at a map and you click on it, you can see two different authors. And if you click into my workshop, you can see all the maps that Dutch and I have worked together on. Whereas if you click on Dutch's workshop, you can see all the ones that he's also made by himself, like Saroni Approach, White Ball Express, and the rest of the maps he's created, which are all, they're all great maps.
Yeah, Infinity Valley is a personal favorite of mine. That was, I think, probably the first map that I really got serious about. Splat, spline work, ground texturing, that sort of stuff, which is now a 3v3, which is quite good. It's a personal favorite of mine simply because I based both my first map and Infinity Valley and Saroni Approach as well, by the way, on satellite shots from the Italian peninsula. I was looking for a way to almost tell a narrative of the 45th U.S. Infantry Division as they were making their way from the landings at Anzio all the way to Monte Cassino. And all these maps, so, starting with my first Quaglietta, Saroni Approach, Olivetta Citra, and Infinity Valley, they're all based on real locations. And you can see for many of them in the workshop description, the actual satellite shot of the area and how I translated that into, the Company of Heroes 3 sort of layout. But I wanted to tell that narrative almost like, you're on a campaign, and there's a collection of maps as well that you can play them in order. And the chronological order is you start with Saroni, then you do Oliveto, then Infinity Valley, and then Quaglietta, because that was kind of the end goal before the 45th moved on to San Angelo and then further on to Monte Cassino. But yeah, I thought that was just a really nice approach to sort of tell that narrative as part of the sort of, what do you say, the storytelling of the maps and having that historical connection. I think is just gives it a bit of extra to a map, and it's the same with the ones that we've recreated and created since. To place it in its area, in its timeline, it needs to fit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think both Viceroy and I are quite keen on that. So, having that context, I think, is important.
If there's anything Dutch and I agree on is that, the best maps in CoH3 are the ones that have a good historical context to them. So you feel like the stakes are real to a degree. There's two different ways to look at a custom map. It's always like, is it during this historical battle, or is it something really, there are a lot of fun scenario maps where it's like, you're fighting in the gates of hell, you're 10,000 miles under sea level, like they're like, I mean, like those are fun maps too, but like I think Dutch and I prefer the ones
Helm's
that are
Deep,
very
that was
like
a recent one that was really good.
Oh yeah, that you see, they're like really cool maps that are on the workshop.
Yeah,
but
sure.
like we're big fans of the historical context of a lot of these maps. Like even Leanne Forest, I was almost debating if we should do Italian or North African, because I was like, oh man, I was worried that there was no good forest in North Africa to base it on. But we found something. If there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, so you do your research, you go, you hop on Google Maps, and you try and find a location that kind of fits the bill. I remember the early discussions were like, it'd be great if we could turn that into a desert map. And my first inkling was like, how are you going to deal with vision blocking?
Yeah,
because it's tough, man.
Yeah, I mean, Leanne Forest, the original, a lot of the vision blocking areas are down to forests and groves. We don't have those entities in Company of Heroes 3. And the only vision blocking, vegetation that you've got to an extent is oak. So how are you going to put that in a desert? It's like
a lot of surprising challenges based off the entities and where the map is supposed to take place. So it's always a challenge. It's always a creative challenge.
The way you guys describe the historical maps kind of makes me reminisce about Battlefield 1 operations where you could play a series of maps, but they were designed to have a historical like battle take place. So they would go from one to the other as if you're taking part of that battle. And I almost wish Co3 had an option to where you could play his Dutch's maps in like you are the Americans and you're fighting through, and if you keep beating the German either player or AI, you would go to the next map and just continue on with that story. That's a
Yeah,
really
that'd be
cool
cool.
take. What
It's
what
a
is
nice
something
thought for sure.
what's something that the you wish the editor had an option or maybe a game mode or just something that you're like I feel like I could do a lot if it just had this.
Ooh, I'd love to go first on this. Building diversity is a big thing that's missing in
Yeah.
the editor, in my opinion, because there are a lot of good buildings. There are a lot of Italian buildings, but something you would never think about as a normal player is windows and door locations, which is a very specific thing. But when you look at certain co-maps in the past, the angle of doors and the angle and number of windows plays a huge part of balance and flow of certain maps. So we've had to be very creative and careful about when we remake a map, do the doors line up? Do the windows line up? Is the size similar enough? Like there's so many different factors. So having different building sizes and shapes, being able to combine multiple building pieces into one cohesive building would be a really cool thing. But just bringing in a lot of extra assets does a huge amount of wonders for the diversity and creativity of map creators. That and bringing in old Company of Heroes assets. Like for Co2 maps, you'll look a lot at them and you don't notice it, but there's like a tree that's fallen into a horizontal shape, like a broken tree, and that's used as yellow cover in about every Co2 4v4 map, especially the Hill 400. So like that's something as simple as that, like a broken tree providing cover. That's not in Co3, which boggles
No.
my mind. So we have to be very creative about how we adapt certain cover positions. And a dead cow, for example, that's in Co1 and Co2. One of my favorite assets. It's not in
I was wondering when
Co3.
you bring that up. Yeah.
I was leading up to the dead. I love the dead cow. It's such a iconic asset.
Oh, Co3 does have, was it the dog? Because I or is it the goat? It's like it's a goat on. I think Mountain Warfare has it on a like a little boat out in the water.
Yeah, like a little.
There are like there are animal assets that are viz, so you can't like actually use them for cover or anything. They're just like invincible floating images. But you've got the dog, the goat, the donkey, the chicken, the cat.
Well,
they're
not
available
really even because they're not textured, right? So you can't even use.
Oh yeah, so it's like a chrome chicken. But
Yeah.
God, I'd kill for that dead cow asset. It's my favorite asset from all of Co. That's what I want the most.
I mean, we tried to approach that in Egleton in a somewhat novel way because Egleton has dead livestock in the fields, and they act as cover. And we tried to recreate that by strategically positioning at a 90-degree angle some donkeys as if they are lying down. You do a bit of a splatter of blood, and
it's almost as if we put like a plastic donkey on the ground and then put yellow cover around it. That's what we did.
Yeah.
If it
So
could like be blown up, that'd be even better. But yeah,
but that's the thing. So it's a visual object, right? So it's immaterial as far as the game is concerned. So it doesn't interact with anything. It doesn't give any cover. It's just there. You can't do anything with it. You could have artillery fire land right on top of it and nothing will change. But there is a way that you can give medium cover to a particular area. So we kind of drew a very small spline underneath the sort of now defunct donkey, the ex-donkey, and sort of allow that sort of medium cover to be there, even though you're looking at something that isn't really there. So there's a little bit of black magic trickery going on in the background kind of thing there. But yeah, for sure, I wish we had a lot more variety of that sort of stuff.
Props, buildings. Yeah.
Coming back to what I really like about building these maps is making it pretty. And I think what I kind of miss is a lot of that. So the variety for me is important, because everything in the map needs to make sense in why something is there. So it needs to have contextual importance. You're not going to put, oil barrels necessarily in the middle of nowhere without some degree of insight as to why they would be there, right? So with every object placement, you kind of think about, okay, why is it there? How did it get there? Is it transported? You probably want some tracks around it to show that. And variety, particularly in sort of vegetation world, much like the tree trunks that Viceroy was talking about. It's that sort of stuff, the world building around that. You don't really have that. The closest that we have is railway sleepers that we now need to use as sort of cover in forested areas to show, piles of wood, or the logs which are stacked up and don't necessarily equate to a fallen tree. So there's you kind of have to work with the tools that you've got, which is unfortunate. So I'd like to see more of that. Having said
it just
that,
kills me to see those props that are in CoH1
Yeah.
and CoH2 and just not in 3. It's just like kills me,
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, the thing that I would like to see more of is environmental effects. So I think, Company of Heroes 2 was great, where you could pick, and Company of Heroes 1 as well, by the way, where you could pick a time of day for the map and it would change it. You would have rain. We don't have rain in Company of Heroes 3
big
at all.
one right there. Yeah, that
Right,
I
it's
think
just
I
not
put
there.
that right below my desire of the dead cow asset. I'd say weather effects is a big thing that CoH3 editor is missing. Like rain, snow, like ashes, like particles that are in the air is not a thing that's in the CoH3 editor. So we can't recreate the rain of General Mud, but we can make the atmosphere look similar to something that had just been raining. But I think the weather effects is something that would be fantastic. But I know your setup for this question involved game modes. There's all these things you can do in the editor for playbills and making custom modes.
Yeah.
But that's definitely something that Dutch and I are not super proficient in. I think the best person to ask that would be Shadow Freak. And
Yeah, for
he's been
sure.
making a ton of great comp stomp maps if you've seen those on the workshop.
Okay.
He does a lot with playbills, and I think for me personally, one of the playbills that I would love to be able to work with, and is perfectly feasible now, if it weren't for the fact that it is incompatible with victory point game modes, is to be able to add multiple atmospheres to a single map. So what I initially tried to do with some of my early maps was to start early morning, sort of dawn, move towards a late morning, midday, and then to a late evening, sort of, by the end of the match, and go through those various times of day, which you can absolutely set. You can create separate atmospheres for each time of day, and the game would transition between those. And you could play around with different fog levels and the lighting, the sun angle and rotation, and the coloring of it all. But the only downside is those playbills, to be able to do more than just 2, are restricted only to the Annihilation game mode. And if you use that in a map with victory points, it just doesn't work. Which for me is a real big shame, because you could really tell that story of an early morning engagement transitioning all the way through to midday, transitioning them further all the way to late evening. But unfortunately, we're limited, if we want an atmospheric transition, to start with something, and then after X amount of time, which you can define, it would transition to the final atmosphere. So you see a lot of, in the official maps as well, you see a lot of them where they start early morning and then transition to a much more later time of day, either late morning or midday. Twin Beaches, I think, is a good example of that, but Langre as an example as well, where you start off in a sort of dusky morning, which is always my favorite time of day, with the long shadows that just really make the textures pop, because there's a lot of bumpiness in the textures, but you don't really see that unless you've got a low sun angle in the atmosphere. So yeah, I'd like to see more of that. Having said that, I think from a texturing perspective, I think the tile sets and the splats and splines that we can work with are incredible. There's a really good amount of different look and feel texture sets to play around with. And I had the fortunate event that during the sort of inclusion of Red Bull, because this was my first time that a map was going to be included in the main game. I had the fortunate sort of event that I had a sit-down meeting over Discord with Monolithic Bacon to sort of talk me through the process. And he looked at my map and he obviously thought, okay, there's a couple of things that we need to do to make it better and make it fit for release. So you kind of work with him through that, and he's been amazing in just explaining some of the fundamentals, the recoloring of stuff, how the atmospheres work. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that and have that time with him, almost like a one-on-one tutorial, which got kind of starstruck, and even though I'm an old gamer, I know him from, his company of Heroes 2 days, where he was chugging out map after map, and all of them I subscribed to and played to death. So to be able to sit down with the man himself and sort of work through, your creation and his thoughts, and was just an amazing experience. And it's taught me a lot, so. But it's just, to me, it showcased the real versatility of the editor and what you can do with it to give it the look and feel that you want to have. And it's perfectly possible to do a lot, but I'd like to do more. and diversity of entities and atmospheric effects are absolutely high on my wish list, for sure.
Well, I've taken a lot of time from both of you, but before we wrap up, if someone listening to this had a choice of one map in your collection, and each of you, and I'm not, you don't have to pick different maps. If you both pick the same one, that's fine. Which one would you recommend? And if it is the map that you're most proud of that you made?
Ooh, it's hard.
It's a good one. It's a good question. I immediately have an answer for that, though, because I'm very biased. Eagleton, the 1v1 map from CoH3, is my absolute favorite, because that map, that was my first introduction to CoH3, and I used to play that map with the Blitzkrieg mod all the time. It wasn't a very competitive map in CoH3, but in CoH3, the thing that makes it unique is the various height differences on the map. That you get a lot of height bonus all over the map, and I think it's an incredible map in terms of taking advantage of CoH3's new gameplay, involving breach and height mechanics, and combining that with a map that was originally designed for CoH3. So I think that, to me, is my absolute favorite map. It plays a lot different than a lot of official maps that are out in the pool, because it has a lot of unique areas too, a lot of staircases and narrow streets. It's an incredible map that takes place half in the city, half in the forests, and I'd say if there's any map you should try, that's definitely one that deserves a little bit of love.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that is an excellent point. I love Eagleton. I mean, there isn't a single map that we've created, either myself or with Viceroy, that I don't have some degree of attachment to, clearly, because otherwise I wouldn't have made it. But I think it kind of depends on your mood, if that makes sense. I love Flooded Plains just because of the look and feel that it has. I think it brings something quite unique to Company of Heroes. But then again, I love a good PvE slugfest. And for me, I still have a very soft spot for White Ball Espresso. I think that was probably the first map where I really got to grips with texturing and grass, 3D grass additions. And I think that's the first one where I could say, yeah, I'm really proud of that one, because the look and feel of it is what I really wanted to do. There's a lot of custom sort of entities in there as well. So you can kind of group entities together to form something else. Like scaffolding is an example, that featured quite heavily near one of the victory points in White Ball, in the north victory point. But we don't really have that. So you kind of build it yourself. And, that's where I started to go the extra mile with some custom build assets. But having said that, I love General Mud just because it's General Mud. It's fantastic. And I loved to try and recreate that really muddy, dank feeling. I mean, it's really difficult because I like Port of Bizerte as well, because of the way that it's so vastly different in its look and feel from the original.
I would say whatever maps you guys have the most nostalgia for, definitely check those out. As if you loved playing 4v4 in CoH2, which as many of you do, especially if you're watching Greyshot's channel, You know, there's no better feeling than going back to a map you spent hours and hours of gameplay on, and then reliving the same best moments and nightmares.
I think that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Very nice. And again, I just wanted to give a shout out because I feel like, one, people want to hear what you guys have to say for making the maps, and two, there are people that may not know all the maps you guys have made. So I want to make sure I will try to leave links down below again to all the maps they've made so you guys can check them out in their workshop history. So please check that out. Again, thank you, DutchToast. Thank you, Viceroy, for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It was
you're
our
welcome. It
greatest
was
pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was nice to be able to talk about this because, to be honest, I think, coming back to the earlier point, perhaps not a lot of people realize just sort of how much time and effort it takes to get these things out the door, and to see the responses that we're getting, I think is one of the reasons that I certainly keep going, because it's a bit addictive. I mean, I like the process, but if you then also get people to say, "Oh yeah, this is great, fantastic, thank you so much," that just gives me a little bit of a boost and motivation to crack on with the next one, kind of thing. And we do have some absolute crackers lined up. So keep your eyes peeled, kind of thing, on our workshop, because there's more to come.
Will do. Again, thank you both again. Thank you to everyone currently listening on into this. It's been Greyshot17, Viceroy, and DutchToast, and we'll see you guys next time.
Hello everyone, this is Greyshot17, and before y'all go, let me give a special shout out to Patreon supporters Joey G240, Milam, Big Cooch, Aphyria, Ace, Pyro Shark, Tonybee 95, Epic Pleb. Thank you all for your incredible support in helping me grow my channel and support my channel and everything I do. Thank you, and to the rest of you, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.